This session is live, so if you have some questions, please use the Q&A sections to raise them, and we will do our best to answer them in the end of the webinar. So I'd like to start with some introduction. At this stage, I'd like to ask Gaia to introduce yourself and what is your role at TIBCO?
Yes, hello everybody. I work in the data science team at TIBCO. I've been there for almost 4 years. My role can be pretty diverse, but I have a particular focus on innovation projects. And I'm particularly excited about this collaboration because it combines process mining, data science, storytelling, and also healthcare, which is a subject I've always been interested in as particularly relevant in this period of time. So
thank you, Gaia. So how about you, David? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the hospital?
Yes, of course. Thanks, Nicolas, and thanks everybody to be here with us. Yes, I work as a data scientist in a mid-sized public hospital. We have 900 beds. It's even if it's not the biggest hospital in our region, it's still a very, very complex organization. We have around 2,000 healthcare professionals. We have a huge activity with 800,000 consultations a year. So it's all of this. It's supported by 100 of different operational systems and database. So about my role is to answer requests of data analysis, both from management and or clinical point of view. So we have questions about forecasting pharmaceutical consumption or measuring nursing care quality or finding, I don't know, why oncological patients are being readmitted to emergency care after a treatment, for example. We find that doctors and management are now more aware about the potential of our databases, and they want to make better decisions with data science. So that's my life now.
Good, thanks, David. It's good to hear those words because we often say that TIBCO makes it possible to unlock the potential of your real-time data for making faster and smarter decisions. So that kind of match very well.
Yeah, it's true for us, of course.
So can you tell us about what's the life of the hospital in 2021? So what's the status of the general healthcare and the doctors, the patient, etc.?
Yes, we can say in 2021, as in we are facing two main problems. We have increasing costs because of the aging of the population. This is true for Europe, of course, and a lot of countries now. And we have pharmaceutical costs. They are taking the biggest part of our budget with new treatments. This is good news because some deadly diseases in the past are now being chronic. But the bad news is that they are very expensive. So we have a limited budget, and in the COVID time, it's really putting a lot of pressure on the system. So what I want to explain with this is that we really need to be more efficient in our management to be sustainable in the future. Talking about our organization, we have highly trained professionals providing great care. But in a slow organization, we have a lot of rigidity and bureaucracy process. And this means that patients are suffering too much waiting, so less quality care. And professionals are spending too much time dealing with administrative process, of course, with a lot less value than taking care of the patients. So these are this is our healthcare in 2021 in our hospital. Healthcare.
Thanks, David. So we're going to drill down into this this notion of process improvement. So you've been working with TIBCO Labs now for a while with us on process mining. Can you describe what process mining is to our audience and what you're trying to gain from it in the context of the hospital?
Yes, of course. We've been hearing a lot of buzzword about artificial intelligence trying to predict diseases better than doctors do. But the reality nowadays is that a lot of problems could be solved just by reducing inefficient processes, reducing mistakes and redundancies. So we call it in process mining, we call it bottlenecks and loops. We have to remind that we record every appointment, lab tests or radiology doctor's comments, pharmaceutical consumption, and we can retrace from our databases all the events of the process followed by millions of patients from the last 20 years or more. This is, of course, raw logs, so they are impossible to understand without a process mining software that can show in a graphical way that the path followed by the patients. So what I mean is that well before searching for new correlations for predicting diseases, what we really need is to use process mining to optimize healthcare organizations. So this is the place of process mining, I think.
Yeah, that's what we've been doing, working together. Can you tell us a little bit about the objective as well? What are the goals for the hospital, for the patients, the doctors?
Yeah, for some diseases like cancer, for example, we know that treatment is really the key to survive. So we need to have an early diagnosis. This is very important, of course, for the survival of the patient, but for the hospital itself. We know that it's five times cheaper to treat cancer, for example, breast cancer. It goes from 10,000 euro to 50,000 euro if we take the cancer in early stage to a later stage. So our goal with process mining is to help doctors and management understand why some of our patients are taking up to 1 year before diagnosis, while others are spending, 2 weeks or 3 weeks for the same disease. We want to know if it's because on undetectable symptoms, or maybe it's a good group of symptoms that we can finding a pattern, for example. Maybe it's we want to know if it's maybe administrative paths that are not working well. So this health evolution will be very different if we find the disease fast. And with TIBCO, we are trying to understand why some are going faster, some are not. Of course, with this, we are trying to make trigger early alerts. We will talk about this later. We plan to analyze COVID patients because their evolution is really different between them. So this is something that we want to understand better this year with Spotfire. Yeah.
Thanks, David. So let's talk a little bit more about process mining. So process mining is not a new topic to you. So when one thinks about processes, sometimes what comes first in our mind is areas like manufacturing or insurance, where everything is very well defined, and the objective is, you know, the process, you need to streamline the execution and make things more efficient, right, as fast as possible. Can you share your thoughts on how this applies to healthcare, if it does, and to monitoring the patient journey? And what are the biggest challenges, especially, that you are facing in this world?
Yes, when of course one would expect in healthcare that a process fits a clear clinical path, but instead, so in the left part of the screen, but instead we always find what we call spaghetti process, so really difficult to understand paths. This is why, because most of patients are having at the same time other health problems, as they are old, or we have, so we will find in our databases a lot of activities that sometimes they are related and sometimes they are not related. So something very difficult is to understand whether the activities are related with the disease that we want to study. We have this is one problem. So to have a lot of different activities. The other problem is that we have a very long path. We have paths or logs with 10 or 15 years long from the diagnosis to the follow-up and discharge. So this makes really difficult to understand the process in healthcare. They are not really clear, and every patient is different. The data access, it's also very hard because we have a lot of different data sources with different IDs, and we have to find the patient in different databases, in the laboratory, in the radio diagnostic. We have to find it in written notes for the doctors. So we really one part that is really difficult is to federate all the information and have to put in a proper way to have a complete view of the path of the patient. So what we really need is to work with the doctors and nurses. So we have worked, and we will see it later with Gaia. We have worked a lot to be able to share the information that we have with doctors to try to understand why and what the activities are what we want to understand.
Yeah, thanks, David. Talking about Gaia, I'd like to turn over to you and to ask you from a data and data science point, what's your thoughts on those challenges around, for example, data access and explainability of the results that in the end can make it easier for business persona?
Yes, as you say, that access is hard, and it's a common problem and an important one. And TIBCO tools lend themselves quite well to this. Consolidating data is one problem, but also what do you do with it once you have it in an event log? And I think there are two key points in my mind. Is the flexibility, that could be flexibility of mapping the data into different categories, different variable roles, but also into different people might want or need to see data at different levels. You can have a high level view, you can have a more detailed view, and also extensibility, because however many use cases you have in mind, there's always something new. You cannot pre-can all the use cases. So I think having software that can be customized is also something very important. So to summarize, in this first phase of the collaboration, we've been building a foundation for a flexible and extensible, customizable product.
Thanks, Gaia, and I think we're going to see it live in a few minutes, actually. So let's move to a demo, actually. So let me introduce the data that you're going to see and the scenario and the use case. So what you have on the screen before we jump into the actual live demo is how you register what we call data sets into the application. So in this example, we took data on patients that visited the hospital. This is coming from multiple databases, as David was saying, from different departments. So you have a mix of structured data. So you have an ID for a patient, you have various dates, for example, the schedule or the actual activity. You have the activities themselves that can be visits, tests, surgeries, or anything like that. And then you have the resources as well. The resources requesting something, could be doctor, for example, or the one performing the activities, different doctor as well. And then you've got unstructured data. So this could be, for example, notes that doctor takes during examination of the patients. And process mining works on the premise of mapping. So you need to tell a little bit the system what column do you want to use as the activity, the timestamp, the case ID, and so on. And then we run some computation on this data, and we will provide you some visual that will help you understand the data. So the idea of this demo was really to study the patients with especially long journeys, with the hope that we can find early signs that could be used for the future patients to improve them going to shorter paths. So it's basically analyzing the worst in order to kind of predict how can we make things improve in the future. So at this stage, I'd like to turn over to you, Gaia, and would you be able to do a demo of the...
Okay, let me share my screen.
I'm going to stop sharing, yes.
Okay, so I will start with when I'm logged on to the application, I would choose the analytics for the HULA webinar, and then this first page appears. So on the left, you see there are all the different tabs. In particular, we have pre-coded some case selections, 1, 2, 3. And these are, their role is to guide the analysis by progressively applying different filters to the cases. In this particular application, you have to understand that a case equals a patient in the hospital. So page by page, we narrow down the selection to the group of patients we really want to focus on. And once I made my selections, then I can see the case histories, the patients pass through the hospital in the Journeys Viewer tab. So the first case selection one is laid out so that I can have a look at the variants I've built. Now, a variant is basically a grouping of cases that share a common process. And we can define variants in different ways. And as Nicolas and David mentioned, in the healthcare scenario, each patient potentially follows a different path. So it can be convenient for some purposes to define variants in a looser sense. Here, in this case, we're showing the variants that we have constructed out of these patients. And each variant has grouped the patients according to the onset of the different kinds of activities. And also you have to note that the activity here is a grouping of high-level activities. And these are the activities that the user selected as the activities they want to focus on. And they are the ones that are more related to cancer. Although we do see all the other activities when we get to the timeline of the patient. So in this example, there are 4 activities. We have diagnostics, radiology, oncology, and radiotherapy. So in this case, for instance, this patient had radiology activities first, followed by the diagnosis, and then the oncology started, and then radiotherapy started. And the first thing we see is that there are quite a number of cases in which a diagnostic is the only activity, so we can remove it from the filter it out, because there are cases in which nothing much is happening for the time being. On the right, then we see other plots that allow us to narrow down the patients. For instance, I may want to choose the patients that were diagnosed in 2019. And then here I see the time that went past between the start of the patient history and the first diagnosis. So let's say I'm interested in patients that had to wait over a year for the diagnosis. And then what I do, I store this selection, and I see that I narrowed the number of patients down from the initial 789 to 44. So in this case, I was interested, on this page, I was interested in finding the patients with a high time between the start of their journey in the hospital and the first diagnosis. In the second page, I'm also doing something similar, but this time I want to calculate the weight between, in this example, the first oncology visit and the first radiotherapy, which gives me an idea about the time elapsed between the start of the first diagnosis, the start of visits regarding the diagnosis, and the initial and the start of the treatment. And again, from the right plots, I can see how these weights are distributed. And again, let's say I want to see the patients that had to wait a long time, between 6 months and a year for the start of treatment. So I select this, and again, I store my selection, and the number of patients now is going down to 11. In the third selection, I wanted to do something slightly different. Now I have narrowed down patients that had long waiting times between diagnosis and treatment. And I want to see if there's something common. In this case, I'm concentrating, in this particular case, I'm concentrating on the journey before the first diagnosis. So if I click on this button, I generate a frequency table of all the activities that took place before the diagnosis. And see here you see also that I have different grouping of activities. On the left, you have this grouped activity, the radiology, the oncology, and all the other departments. And I'm not considering only the focused activities. And on the right, I have the more detailed activity that took place. And let's say that in the higher frequency activities, I'm interested in looking at activities that were not quite related to cancer, but might indicate there was some initial pain that could have been considered as a precursor to a cancer diagnosis. So I analyze these commonalities and I filter the patients again. So I'm down to 5 patients. And now I go to the journeys viewer, in which I can inspect their path. I could choose to inspect the patients for all the intermediate selections. Well, let me focus on the one that I pre-selected, on these 5 ones. So if I mark on these cases, each patient ID, which is obviously obfuscated, I see I have on the top plot each different activity on a time scale. So each activity has its own swim lane, so to speak. So I can see the separation between the different activities. But at the same time, I see what activities took place at the same time. At the bottom, I have this kind of snapshot that allows me to see where activities group, so where we have classes of activity at the same time. So it's quite common for a patient after diagnosis, which is shown by this vertical line, the first milestone we consider is diagnosis. We see there's a cluster of activities after the patient is diagnosed, which is quite to be expected. Let's say that I noticed that the first patient also has some kind of cluster of activities before the diagnosis. So let's say I want to investigate more this cluster. I can select the data, and then I have the table that represents the marked data appearing below. I see that even though these are patients diagnosed with breast cancer, even though it's not specifically with breast cancer, I can see there is some gynecological visits taking place. So I have to say this is just for the sake of of showing a possible use cases. This is not something we have validated with doctors. It's just an example to show the workflow. Let's say I'm interested in this particular patient, then I can start an investigation on the selected patient. So I can say, okay, please investigate. And I can create an investigation. So then I can, somebody who is looking at all the different investigations can see all the cases that I've opened. These cases, they all follow a common workflow from the creation to the investigation, and then you can see all the different actions as possible to take at this stage. So this is a way of linking an exploration of the metrics that I've defined to narrow down the patients I'm interested in, to selecting patients and looking at the timeline, and then creating some kind of follow-up. And this concludes my demo for the time being.
Thank you, Gaia. That was a really cool demo. One thing to note is that everything that you saw are really template based. So all the visuals, the workflows, as well as the last piece, the case management piece, can be really easily extended without coding, using the underlying components of the solution. So let's talk a little bit about the collaboration with HULA and TIBCO, and how it started and where we are now. So let's take a small step back. Pre-COVID, that sounds like a long time ago, the TIBCO Labs team took a fresh look at process mining. So process mining has been there for a while, but we are seeing a lot of customers currently revisiting the topic to help them better understand and quantify their process. The data-driven approach is very attractive because it brings objectivity to the analysis. So we see a lot of use cases such as digital transformation, process mining being phase one, if you will, ERP migration, or in this case, patient journeys or customer journeys are just a few examples that we see more and more. It's also something very horizontal, and we can really apply this to many industries, even if today we are focused on healthcare. So what we've been doing is we worked with our initial customer and we created Project Discover. TIBCO obviously has a strong product portfolio in domains such as integration, data management, process and management, analytics, and data science. So these are the main ingredients, if you will, of process mining. So really what we did is we used the TIBCO Labs program to put the customer requirement at the front, recompose some of our products capabilities into a process mining experience. We created a few extensions such as the process visual that you see on the screen. We actually saw that for the healthcare use case, the journey viewer was a better visualization than the traditional process map that we usually use for other industries, but we come back to that. And finally, we took a very quick time to market approach. So let's have a look. How does Project Discover work? So really we do, there's kind of three phases. Phase one is we connect to your systems and we expose the event logs data across multiple sources using a technique that we call data virtualization. So basically we create a virtual data mart, if you will. So your data doesn't need to move. Then on the middle phase, we run the process mining algorithm on demand or on a scheduled fashion. And then finally, we offer to a more business user, let's say, the visual exploration and quantification of metrics of the processes in a very interactive and self-service manner. So basically, you pick the visual you like or are the most suited to your data and your workflows. And finally, as Gaia was showing at the end of the demo, we allow to raise investigation and track resolution of underlying issues by case resolver. So again, we use some of our case management capabilities, and it's very easy to compose your own case management app using these tools. So let's look at the journey together with HULA. It's really, we started just a few months ago, basically at the beginning of January. We thought it's a great match with Project Discover, and also the use of the technology to apply for a good cause, which is help improve the cancer patient care, and therefore we decided to join forces with the TIBCO for Good program, and really we end up with two sides of the coins. On one hand, we help David in your mission to improve the healthcare, and on the other hand, we try to bring this back into engineering so we can create a better solution that other hospitals and other organizations can use in the future. So David, I'd like to turn back to you. So when we started the project, you were a Spotfire user already, which is a core component of our analytics platform. One of the things you told me with Spotfire is you like the idea that you could extend the reach to doctors and nurses. Can you tell us a little bit about that aspect and maybe about the collaboration in general as well?
Yes, as we saw with all the examples that Gaia showed, every patient has a really unique path. So it's very difficult to understand every path without the help of the clinical personnel. So we really needed a process mining tool that can be used by the process owners. So as a IT, we can start the work on a process analysis, but ultimately we need to involve doctors and nurses to understand when a process fits the medical protocol or not. So a lot of the work with TIBCO was to create a tool that someone, a doctor or nurse, without previous knowledge about process mining that can use. So also we needed to integrate a lot more information necessary to have all the information about the patient, like free text or pharmaceutical consumption or lab tests coming from different data sources. So we can, with this tool, we can also include the ideal path to see what are the deviations. So I think really the strength of Spotfire is that we can have a powerful process mining tool, but also include all the information needed to explain what's happening to the patients, like in a traditional BA tool or a dashboard. So this about the tool itself, but about the collaboration with TIBCO Labs, what I really want to say is that I'm amazed because of we are working with the flexibility of a startup, but having all the human and technical resources of a big company. So for me, it's really a pleasure, and I think the result is already great. Even if we have already a lot of work to have results, but what I really want to is to thank the whole TIBCO Labs for the effort made until now. It's a really great job.
Thanks a lot for that, David. So, I mean, on our side, obviously, likewise, the collaboration has been fantastic so far, and we hope it's just the beginning, actually. So let's do a quick summary before we move on to the Q&A session and see if we have questions. I think I see we have some. Quick summary. So we started a journey together using process mining and Project Discover to focus on this improving cancer care by understanding the patient journey. This was really the starting point like a few months ago. We have some initial results that you've seen, so more to come, but we already kind of developed this case journey viewer and case selection methods that can be shared with doctor and nurse, as David said. So I'd like to give you the final word, David. Before the Q&A, can you tell us what you see as the next step for the project?
Yes, we have, from a clinical point of view, we will like to look in detail some other very critical cancers in terms of waiting time. And also we will try to understand why COVID patients are evoluting so different. This, from a clinical point of view, these are the things that we are going to study in the next month. From a technological point of view, we have 3 main goals. First, work on text mining capabilities to include doctors' notes information, to work more on this part. We want really to have easier access to federate information of different databases using other TIBCO tools that we will integrate with the software, with Spotfire. And what I think is that it's really interesting is that we want to create early alert systems using our historical clinical knowledge to avoid unnecessary delay. So we are going to try to find patterns for having early alerts and trigger some alarms that doctor can look at in detail and trying to avoid these delays. And it's from it.
Yeah, sounds like a plan for the future. So let's see. Let's move to the Q&A. Let's see if we have any questions. We have a few questions. So maybe I'd like to start with a one for you, David. Can you expand on how looking at individual patients can help the hospital remove bottlenecks in the overall customer journey process?
Yeah, in fact, this is the view that we saw. It's more thought for the patient itself. So as we can understand why some patients are taking too long, we understand why they are taking so long. We can reduce the assets that they are using and reduce the number of so the price of medicines, the drugs. So yeah, of course, when you understand why some patients is taking too much time, you will put in place some rules to avoid that delays. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been talking about is to generate alerts. Once you identify the pattern on some individual cases, then we are going to generate alerts so that the future patient can be, or the doctor could be alerted, like those reviews that we did manually before, we could just do it in an automatic fashion as well. Yeah. Thank you. So let's take a look at the other questions. So I have maybe one for Gaia. What were some of the consideration or decision you made in designing the template for doctor and nurses?
Well, we wanted to make the process quite easy to follow. So for instance, the consistent coloring scheme and the pages, we didn't want them to look overcrowded. The selection, so the user is always aware of how many patients they have selected and where does the selection come from. And in particular, the journey viewer, the way it's displayed, should give an immediate appreciation of the timeline of the case. You could see for instance, it could have a very long timeline in which many years have passed, but the diagnosis is concentrated on the last bit of the time. So maybe the activities before that were relevant or irrelevant. So, but it's immediately understandable by a doctor or a nurse. And then we can do more investigation. We can, for instance, understand how many of these patients share common paths and bottlenecks. So that was a principle to start this particular collaboration application.
Okay, thanks, Gaia. Let me take a look. So where is the data stored for governance purpose? So let me take that one. And there is another one on TIBCO Labs as well. So around the data, so I'll prepare this kind of summary architecture. So Discover, or the process mining application, is available as a cloud service. So basically, on the left side, our customer can bring their data, such as, for example, the database from David. Those databases are managed by our customer. Obviously, they can be a mix of cloud or on-prem systems. So you bring your data, and then we kind of virtualize the access to that data, and then we run some compute and some algorithm on the data, and then we kind of store the result in a database. So that piece, to answer the question, can be run anywhere. So it can be on cloud, it can be managed by TIBCO, managed by the customer, or it can be on-prem as well. And we support any cloud. So we use a kind of cloud native architecture. So it can run on AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and many others as well. While the application itself is very easy. It's just you access a cloud application as a service, and you find insight in your processes. Let me move on to the other question about TIBCO Labs. What was it? So how do we work with TIBCO Labs? Is it available to anyone? So yes, TIBCO Labs is a formal program that we introduced like 2 years ago. It's an innovation program for our customer and our partners. So it's available. It's a free program. It's available through the Office of the CTO that I represent for Europe. Really reach out to us if you have any idea. Really, the idea is there's kind of two sides of the program. One side is to work on innovative use cases with our customer, such as process mining, but we have many others around AI, around augmented reality, and blockchain, and some others. And the other side of it is really to prepare the product of the future for TIBCO. So it's the kind of engineering aspect of it as well. But yes, reach out to us, and we'll evaluate all the requests and the possible project. So I think that's about it, and we also reached the end of the webinar. So I'd like to thank a lot Gaia and David again for your great presentation today, and thanks everyone for taking the time to watch this webinar. We hope to see you soon. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.